I think we're going to attempt to answer some questions. Bean, can you help me out with that?
Yes, absolutely. Good job, Cory. So looking over our list here, we answered quite a few of them as we were going along, and I believe there were several that were asked along the way that you addressed. And so if you had a question that you asked and we've answered it and just asked you if you had additional comments or concerns with that to let us know, please do that. But we'll go down the list as quick as we can here, and we will not get kicked out of here at 8 o'clock, but by no means is anyone required to hang around and listen to everything. But if you've got questions, feel free to hang out. We'll stay for a little bit longer and try to get as many of these questions taken care of as possible. So the first one here, and I think a lot of these are going to kind of be on the South Carolina DNR's plate of responsibilities, but just to make sure we touch on everything, there's a question from one of our participants, could we as the Hunters of South Carolina write up something trying to get the right to have a weekend of every month to run dogs as a big group?
Could you do it? Absolutely. In fact, I'd probably be willing to put my name on it with you. Whether or not that will actually happen, that's out of my hands and out of my control. I think, in looking at the questions I saw earlier, there were a lot of questions pertaining to more opportunities on government lands to hunt pigs. If you want that to happen, I think there needs to be some pretty heavy discussions between the Department of Natural Resources, the South Carolina legislators, and the hunters that want to pursue them. And I think y'all need to all get together and have that discussion. DNR has very legitimate reasons, personnel-wise, why they have dedicated smaller blocks to that. But at the same time, I understand from a hunter standpoint too, there's land out there. We pay a fee to access that land. Why can't we access it? I understand both sides of this, but the answer is we're going to have to work with DNR and we're going to have to work with legislators and the hunters and get to a happy median that is, reasonable for everyone.
All right. So next up, that first slide or two where you showed the pig next to you on the bank of the creek, someone asked how much did that hog weigh? Maybe
250, somewhere in there. 250, 275.
All right. Next question. Have hogs that they have hogs that if you put corn out to bait them, they leave. What would you recommend to bait them with? They are located off intercoastal waterway.
So they're leaving when you put corn out. If you're down on the coast near an intercoastal waterway, there's probably a good bit of vegetable production near you. I would consider talking to some of those vegetable growers and seeing if I can't get some of the stuff they were going to throw away. A lot of those pigs are used to eating vegetables. Rotten tomatoes have caught many a hog in different places. Peaches have done the same in other locations.
I've got two questions back to back here about a bounty program as it relates to pigs, and maybe just touch on why that may or may not be a successful option.
Well, in general, bounties don't work. They've been tried time and time again, and it really doesn't work. I entertained that question with someone else the other day, and it brings me back every time to where the state of Texas is at, where they have established buying points. Where you transport the hogs to them, they get vet inspected and sold, and the trapper or dogger or whoever gets a payment based on pounds that they brought in. To me, that is the same thing as a bounty system, but right now we're not set up to accommodate that in South Carolina. As far as, paying people for the tails they turn in, I doubt you ever see that. Even if you did see it, it's not going to be effective.
All right. So next question is, if the hog population is on the decline, why is there a sudden push for a swine transport law again?
That's a good question. One of the things is, I said they don't appear to be getting moved around as much as they used to. I didn't say they're not getting moved around. And if they're getting moved around, I'm all for having stiffer legislation on it. Because hogs, a lot of the people, this is the part, a lot of the people that move hogs around don't even own property. they lease the hunting rights to somewhere and they bring the hogs in and dump them out. Well, then they just become the problem of people who actually do own property. And to me, there should be some penalties for that.
All right. Next person asks, have there been any surveys to conclude an estimated loss of crop production or capital in the farming communities due to feral hog habitation?
Not to the best of my knowledge. If they have, it's been done via mail-out surveys. And I may be wrong. Sherry Rodriguez at Clemson may have done some work with this in recent years. I'd have to go back and look on that, but I know at one point in time she was thinking about doing some work on that. Have we had a true field level economic study on it? Not to my knowledge, no.
Is there any evidence that feral pigs can impact wild turkey population by either predatory or competition for resources?
They're opportunistic omnivores that eat anything with a calorie in it. So ground nesting birds are definitely at risk where we have high hog populations. Definitely. Turkeys and quail both.
They'd also present a risk to that as far as habitat management, wouldn't they not? And ability for those ground nesting birds to have the resources necessary?
Yeah, that's possible as well.
All right. So what are the feral pigs' best senses and how can we improve our hunting tactics to increase successful hunting or trapping?
Their nose is their number one defense. Their nose is their number one defense. They know how to use the wind. If you've deer hunted, you know how you have to play the wind to be effective at deer hunting. Well, if you're going to hunt pigs, you better learn how to be even more effective at playing with the wind. Learn where those bedding areas are at. Learn where those travel areas are at. If you got a particular spot that you want to hunt, set up multiple stands in that area to accommodate for different wind directions. But don't go sit that stand if the wind is in the wrong direction, because they will pattern you and they will stop using that area when you're there.
All right, so the next one's a little bit longer. It says, it's part question and part comment. It says, I'm running a trap now, and I told the guys leasing the property to not shoot any hogs over corn during deer season. A few others I've spoken to who trap heavily said they will become bait shy and not typically return to the area anytime soon. How true is this? Should a hunt club such as this choose between still hunt / spot install hunting methods and trapping, or does it make that much of a difference when pigs are shot over corn?
It can make a difference, but in the vast majority of the situations, I don't think you're going to see that become a problem. If you're in an area where hunting over corn heavily, you may see that. You may see it, but that's one of those that's going to be very site specific. That's not going to be the case everywhere. I know in my experience during deer season, if you get the opportunity to shoot pigs, you shoot pigs, and we trap right after that and we hadn't had issues. But I'm not going to tell you that couldn't be an issue, but I wouldn't expect it to be very common.
Next up, is there anything being tried to feed them to become sterile?
I think early on there was some work being done with some of these contraceptives, but I don't know if anybody else is still working on it. When you look at how frequently hogs cycle, you would essentially have to see to it that sow was administered a contraceptive every 21 days in the wild. Good luck. That's a tough task.
Somebody asked, what is the best disposal method after killing?
The barbecue grills always work pretty good for me. You don't get this nice manly figure with this big old belly without eating a little bit, but they are pretty good table fare. If you're not going to use them for table fare, they need to be disposed of according to DNR or DHEC guidelines. DNR has rules established for what you have to do with carcasses, which is basically a burial, I believe, or an incineration. And DHEC has some guidelines on how to dispose of those things. So I would encourage you to look out to there. I don't have the specifics on the top of my head, but there are guidelines out there.
All right. So they were commenting on the disposal method as being a good question, and then they said that they were having trouble finding places to process. Is there a place where people could find a list of processors for hog meat?
Uh, I don't know the answer to that, but processors are permitted, so to speak, to operate. And I'm not sure if that goes through DNR. I think it actually does go through DNR, game processing facilities. So DNR probably has a list of game processing facilities. But one of the things you'll find is they also fall under DHEC guidelines. And so a lot of people don't deal with hogs because you're essentially required to have separate units for hogs and for other species. They can't be intermixed. So, and then if you move from one cooler to the cutting room and you change species, you would have to, completely tear down and start over, clean everything. So a lot of people just didn't go through the hassle to deal with pigs, understandably.
We had a question about any potential additives to put over a corn pile that would deter deer, but attract the hogs.
I don't know about attract the hogs, but deter deer. Yeah, I mean, there are deer repellents on the market that don't seem to do anything to pigs. So you could play with some of those commercial deer repellents that are out there and see how they perform for you.
Going back to disposal after kill, what is the responsibility of the shooter or trapper to bury or remove the carcass?
That is law. If you're hunting and you field dress or dispose of an animal, DNR has guidelines on how that's supposed to be done.
What do I need to look for when trying to bait and still hunt for hogs?
I think where most people mess up is they're in areas that don't have pigs. Simple as that. If you don't have an abundance of fresh sign there, then there's a chance the pigs aren't there. And also on these properties, I've seen pigs be in an area heavy for 3 or 4 weeks, and then something happened, and it may be 4 or 5 months before a pig sets foot there. So in order to be effective at still hunting for pigs, whether that's stalking or sitting in a deer stand, you're going to have to do a lot of scouting and keep up with those animals and see where they're at and where they're using. So boot leather is still the best method. Get out and walk and see what they're doing.
Should you wear gloves while disposing the hogs or only when dressing the hogs?
It's not going to hurt you to throw them on every time you're touching one. And I guess there is a possibility for you to get it from blood, but predominantly the issues we're worried about, field dressings where you're going to run into the biggest risk of being contaminated. But again, nitrile gloves are cheap and it only takes a split second to put one on. Keep a couple pairs in your pocket when you're out messing with pigs. You won't even know they're there. And when you get ready for them, they're in your pocket.
What is the reason for moving a hog?
Well, again, that goes back to a lot of people consider them as sport animals, and people have properties they want to hunt that don't have pigs, and next thing you know, pigs have been moved over to those properties. That's been seen time and time again.
I saw this question several times, and we are looking at the questions that came in through the pre-course survey that we sent out, as well as what came in tonight. But this seemed to be a common one about the danger involved to small game hunters or just casual woods users or whatever it may be in relation to pigs.
Well, the reality is hogs aren't out there looking to run you down and eat you like some articles would lead you to believe. Typically, the response when a hog encounters a human is to run the other way. In a few situations, I've had that is not always the case, but in a few situations, I've stumbled across a sow with pigs who'll run at you and woof. I don't know if y'all have ever heard them, but they'll come running at you and woof. And when they do that, most people's response is to turn around and haul tail the other direction. And generally the pig turns around and goes about their business. But as far as, chasing you down, you're not going to run into that. You're not gonna run into that. And it's a whole different story when you get one cornered and he's a little upset because the dog's biting him in the head or the rear end. But the average person walking through the woods is not gonna have an issue. The small game hunters, especially, I know the squirrel hunters, you gotta love a mountain cur or a feist dog. I don't care who you are, they're awesome critters. But if you are a serious squirrel coon hunter, I would highly encourage you to break your dogs off of hogs, because I have yet to see a squirrel dog who would not go bay a hog that would stand there and let them. And if you're not prepared to deal with a big boar hog that's upset, you don't want your dog doing that, you know. So that would be the only issue I would think of for the small game hunter.
All right. This person says the property they manage is about 375 acres. They've trapped on it for 2 years with a 6 trap and have caught 2 complete sounders. The problem they seem to have is the pigs they have don't seem to live on the property. They come through and may stay for a week or two, and by the time I've gotten them using the trap, they randomly leave and are gone. Very frustrating. Wondering if this is a problem you run into, and if so, how do you fix it?
I don't have the answer on how to fix it, but that is a common problem. That's a very common problem. That's one of those situations that goes back to what I was mentioning earlier, cooperation between landowners. You need to know your neighbors. You need to work with your neighbors. And if possible, you need to be on the same page with management as your neighbors. So when they're on one property, y'all work together to take them out. When they're on the other property, you're working together to take them out. And communicating back and forth with each other, you can be pretty effective. And I realize, and I say that, I realize there are instances where landowner cooperation is not going to happen. I get that. And I don't have an answer for you if that's the case.
All right. 2 questions, kind of hit them both at once. When you're hunting for hogs and whatever method you're using, if you're continuing to put pressure on them and on that property, is there a time you should take to away from that, or is continual pressure the answer? And then kind of on the back end of that, what is the most effective way to manage a hog population without affecting the wildlife population? Desirable wildlife, I would assume.
Say that last part again.
So one person is wanting to know, should the pressure be continued to put on them even if the use starts to drop? And then the second part is the most effective way to manage the hog population without affecting other wildlife populations.
Well, the first part of that, I would tell you to watch your cameras. You know, and if we're managing pigs, it's pretty important that we got photo surveillance going on year round. And in watching those cameras, you will see the areas. If you've got it set up in a fairly decent manner across the property, you'll have a pretty good idea of what areas they're using at what times and when they're using them. And I would just let that camera tell me how much pressure I needed to put on them. Or not necessarily how much pressure I needed to put on the pigs, but where I needed to be at to apply that pressure. You're going to have to move around to work on these things. And that's just the bottom line. You know, you're going to have to pay attention to what's going on out there and adjust your plans to match what the pigs are actually doing. And trail cameras give you a good opportunity to do that. How to not let your management activities impact other wildlife? You know, I don't know the answer to that. I don't even know what the actual impacts to pig management are on other wildlife. I don't know if anybody really knows. You know, obviously we're putting bait on the ground, and you know, we only think about the positives. You know, we're kind of trapped in that. Getting rid of pigs is a positive. I hadn't really looked at it from a negative standpoint. I don't know that you would find there really is any negative standpoints for managing them. As a deer hunter, you know, I get their opinion. You know, they don't want, you know, deer. They don't want you to hog dog when they're deer hunting because you're gonna mess up the deer. And I don't know if that's true or not. In my experience, it's not true, even though a lot of people believe it. If we're still hunting, you know, I don't really see how that impacts any other wildlife species if we're taking them out. Again, this would be one that I have heard from deer hunters, and I have had some discussion with turkey hunters about pig management activities kind of bothering them with what they're trying to do. You know, again, work with your neighboring landowners, and y'all get on the same page and work together and try not to mess them up, and hopefully they'll try not to mess you up, and y'all work together through the other times to trap what you can trap, shoot what you can shoot.
All right, we got just a few more we're going to hit real quick, and then we'll call it quits for this evening. I think we've covered just about everything in some form or fashion. One that I just saw come through, does DNR consider the cell/real-time camera on the traps the same as checking the trap every 24 hours?
No. A physical appearance.
And then,
but having said that, that is for a set trap. I'm not going to set that trap unless I anticipate that night or that day, depending on the situation. I'm not going to set that trap unless I fully anticipate every single pig I'm trying to catch to walk into that trap. So if it's not set, then I don't have to check it every day. It would only be those instances where I have that trap actually set. If I've got that trap set, I'm already planning on going there that day because I'm going to have it full of pigs and I need to get rid of them. Does that make sense?
it does. Of course, I didn't ask the question. One of the other questions we had was related to the ratio of traps per acre or area, I would assume. So I would have to say that you're probably going to relate that back to your activity you're seeing on your cameras and your work on the property in advance of any traps being set, as far as use and population that you're trying to control. But anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah. What you said is definitely accurate. It's going to be dependent on what my cameras are telling me. And if I've got multiple sounders using slightly different areas, it's okay for me if those areas are relatively close together, but they're not the same area, to attempt to catch two different sounders at the same time. So I could have two traps going pretty close to each other, you know. But again, that's going to be dictated by what those cameras tell me, where those sounders are actually at. And I'm going to base my trapping efforts on those sounders. I know a lot of people who do one sounder at a time, just to prevent breaking the pattern of other sounders by doing multiple bait sites. Depending on the size of the property, you know, that may be the case. If they're only going to be 500 yards apart, I might discourage trying to use two traps at one time. I may knock out one sounder and then go after the next one. If we're on 2,000 acres of property and I got hogs on one side and hogs on the other side, yeah, I might run two sets at one time.
You mentioned it briefly earlier, but we had another question about what does it take to register that property for night hunting? Is there a lead time, cost?
No, it's free. All you have to do is go on the website, on DNR's website. Or the easiest way, just Google SCDNR hogs, and it'll take you to the page. It's got all their hog information on it. And somewhere on there, there's a link to register the property. Click on the link, fill out the little form, and you're registered.
We've had a few questions related to what other things you can do with the trapped hogs after they've been trapped, about feeding the needy type organizations or something like that.
If you can find a processor that is processing pigs, most of them will give you the opportunity to bring that pig in, pay them the processing fee, and then they donate the pig since you don't want it to a charitable organization. I don't know that actually happens with pigs. I know that it does happen with deer. I don't know that they can legally give that pig out as a food source. I don't know that you can legally do that in South Carolina because pigs are sold as domesticated animals and they have to be veterinary inspected. The wild pigs don't have a location to be veterinary inspected. So I don't know that you can legally do that in South Carolina. That would be a question for somebody with DHEC.
One or two more and we'll call it quits. For people that are interested in hunting, where can they find other contacts or farmers or people that are looking for people to do that kind of work on their property?
Well, DNR maintains a list of nuisance wildlife providers. So you could reach out to DNR and discuss the opportunity for you to be added onto that list. The other suggestion I would give you, local feed and seed stores are a good place to hang out and meet farmers and figure out who's got problems and who might need help. You may be able to get some leads from your local DNR officers. You may be able to get some leads from your local USDA office. I personally don't deal with that because there's too much liability with connecting landowners with hunters, and I just prefer not to get into that situation. But you know, back in the day, people used to knock on the door and talk to somebody and ask about hunting. There's no reason you can't do that today. There's no reason you can't do that today.
All right, and then size of boar. If you are going to eat one, what size would you cut that off?
I don't have a cutoff. I do it by smell. If it's a stinking boar hog, then I'm not going to take it home and eat it. If it doesn't stink, I have yet. Well, I'll take it back. One time I had a boar hog that didn't smell, that when it was cooked, you could tell definitely it was a boar hog. That's happened one time. Now, again, if it smells, I'm not trying it. And I've had them that were 200 pounds that didn't have a bit of smell and were delicious on the barbecue grill. I've had them that were 75 pounds and would gag a maggot, you know. So it's each individual pig, but if it stinks, I'm not eating it. And that's the best method. It doesn't really have anything to do with weight.
All right, last two, and we've answered all of them.
All right.
Is hog calling an effective tactic in South Carolina?
Yes, it can be very effective, especially if you know where those hogs are bedding at and you have a pretty good idea of how they're coming out of those bedding areas. If you can set up with the wind right in those areas that they were normally going to go to, it's pretty easy to entice them out with decent calling. You know, any of these new electronic callers that are on the market, if you got decent sounds to go with it, you have potential to call pigs. Pigs are vocal, very vocal. And that's the reason we call them sounders. You know, you can hear them everywhere they go, but they are vocal. They do respond to other pigs in their area. So, you know, getting out there and making a few sow grunts, if there's pigs close by, those pigs are going to come in to check that out. If there's a boar by, he's going to come to check that out. So, you know, yeah, electronic calling is an effective method.
All right, and congratulations to Sonny King for getting the last question in of the evening. And he asked, can you recommend a trail camera?
You know, there's so many of them on the market now, and the technology is so much better than it was 10 years ago. I don't have one preferred camera. I've used most of them at this point. Right now, we're running all Browning cameras, and so far, I'm pretty impressed with them. The biggest problem I've found so far with the Browning cameras we're running is people keep walking off with them. But I don't know. If you install the right anti-theft device, it'd probably hang around. Cuddy Back's got some good systems. Muddy's got a few decent systems out there. There are a lot of good options. Check out some of the options available from Boar Buster. Check out some of the options available from Jaeger Pro. There are a lot of good high-quality cameras on the market. Sorry, I couldn't tell you a specific one, but I've used a lot of different trail cameras. In fact, if I was able to show you this whole office right now, there's probably 10 different brands of trail cameras in here right now. And every camera that is in this office is effective for what I'm doing.
Is there any feature in particular you look for above others?
That depends on the type of camera you're using. If you're using one where you have to go out and check the pictures yourself, the only thing I'm looking for is megapixels there. If we're using satellite cell communication type stuff, my biggest thing is the quality of the transmitter in there and the ability to communicate with my cell phone or other device. So I want the highest quality I can get there.
Gotcha. All right. Well, good deal. All the attendees, we've got 93 attendees still hanging around. I appreciate y'all hanging out to the end and really making this a great event. We'll be sending out, I'm sure, something as we follow up after this is wrapped up. Quite a few people asked also if we recorded this, and yes, we did. It will take us some time to get that out where you can go back and watch it, because with Clemson, we are required to have some ADA compliant measures in there, such as captioning and whatnot. But we'll be working on getting that taken care of and getting it uploaded where it's on our YouTube page or our website in some form or fashion. If you're interested in getting a copy of the presentation, send me an email and I can work out with you to get some form of that, probably some kind of PDF document where I can get you a link to it. But with that, we'll wrap it up and y'all have a great night.
Have a good evening. Thank y'all for showing up.